At 6:12 a.m., after 11 hours inside a warehouse cold enough to make your bones negotiate with God, I was called into conference room B. That was never a good sign. Calvin Rusk stood at the head of the table with a printed spreadsheet in one hand and the kind of smile men wear when they are about to ruin lives and call it leadership. "Effective immediately," he said. "We're eliminating the entire overnight shift." For a second, nobody breathed. 17 people sat around that table in steel-toed boots, tired faces, and jackets still dusted with freezer frost. Marcus looked down at his hands. Evelyn whispered, "All of us?" Brian actually laughed once, because the human brain sometimes mistakes disaster for a bad joke. Calvin nodded like he had just solved poverty. "This saves the company approximately $15,000 in monthly shift premiums, overtime exposure, and redundant labor." Redundant. That was adorable. Only after that sentence did I fully understand the insult. Before I tell you how that one redundant decision nearly destroyed a $210 million license, please hit the like button. I'm also curious. Where are you watching from, and how old are you? Now let me show you why Calvin needed my name more than he knew. My job was not glamorous. I did not sit in boardrooms inventing phrases like cost discipline while other people paid the price. I monitored vaccine storage, verified temperature logs, handled emergency alerts, and signed the compliance records that kept our medical logistics license alive. That license supported a $210 million hospital distribution contract. In plain English, I was the person legally required to be present when the city slept, and millions of dollars in temperature-sensitive medical products depended on someone noticing when a machine blinked wrong. Calvin, meanwhile, had been our new vice president of operations for 7 months. His greatest known achievement was replacing real experience with dashboards. I asked, "Who's covering certified compliance overnight?" "The system is automated," he said. "Machines don't sleep." "No," I replied, "but licenses expire." His smile tightened. Then HR slid a packet across the table. Termination papers, severance summary, return of property checklist, and one final document titled Compliance Transition Acknowledgement. Near the bottom, one line stopped me cold. "Night compliance responsibility shall remain under Maris Dean's active certification until replacement approval is completed." They had fired me, but they still wanted my name keeping them legal. Please note that this story is a work of fiction, developed with the support of ASI to create a more emotional and engaging journey. Most importantly, I want to share a message about self-respect, human dignity, and the courage to stand up for yourself. I hope you find something meaningful in this story. That line on the form did not surprise me. After 9 years at Northvale Biotransit, I had learned that companies loved responsibility right up until it needed a paycheck. I had spent almost a decade on the overnight side of the cold chain, the part nobody bragged about in investor meetings because it happened under fluorescent lights at 2 a.m. My job was simple, only to people who had never done it. I watched temperature curves, checked freezer seals, answered alarms, verified driver handoffs, reviewed access logs, and signed legal records proving every shipment stayed inside range. One bad hour could ruin medicine. One missed signature could freeze a hospital contract. One executive with a spreadsheet could threaten both before breakfast. The year before Calvin arrived, a compressor failed in Storage Bay C during a storm. The alert came through at 3:08 a.m., buried under 3 false alarms and a power fluctuation. I caught the pattern, locked the bay, moved the pallets, and saved a vaccine lot valued at $18.7 million. The next morning, leadership called it excellent system resilience. Naturally, the system received praise. I received a $5 coffee card. Then came Calvin Rusk, 7 months ago, wearing confidence like cologne and knowing about as much about cold chain compliance as a houseplant knows about aviation law. He cut maintenance intervals. He reduced training hours. He questioned why overnight staff needed manual checks when the software already watches everything. My favorite line was delivered during a budget meeting. "The night shift does not generate revenue." Of course not. We only kept revenue from turning into spoiled inventory, legal exposure, and headlines featuring words like investigation. back in conference room B, Calvin tapped the termination packet like it was a winning lottery ticket. I looked at the compliance acknowledgement again, feeling the anger settle into something colder and more useful. Then my phone buzzed. Evelyn had texted, "Maris, the dashboard still somehow lists you as active overnight compliance lead." Evelyn's message sat on my screen like a warning label management could not read. I looked up from the packet. Calvin was watching me, waiting for my signature, as if I were a printer that had jammed. "I'm not signing this," I said. His eyebrows lifted. "It's a transition acknowledgement, Maris. Standard procedure." "No," I said, tapping the paragraph. "This says my certification remains responsible for overnight compliance until a replacement is approved. You terminated me at 6:12. My badge was disabled at 6:19. I cannot legally supervise a shift I cannot enter." HR suddenly found the table fascinating. Calvin leaned forward. "We need continuity." "You need a certified replacement," I replied. "Continuity is not a magic word." His smile disappeared, which was unfortunate, because it had been doing fine work pretending he understood the room. I asked HR for 3 things: a copy of my termination notice, the compliance transition packet, and written confirmation of the exact time my access ended. The HR manager hesitated, looking at Calvin like a teenager waiting for permission to tell the truth. Calvin said, "You're making this difficult." "I'm making it documented." Then I opened my phone and sent one email to Calvin, HR, Legal, and the compliance inbox. As of my termination and access removal this morning, I no longer accept responsibility, legal authority, or certification coverage for any Northvale Biotransit overnight operation. The room went quiet in that corporate way, when everyone hears the lawsuit before it arrives. Calvin stood. "Security will escort you out." 2 guards met me by the elevator. I walked between them, past the people whose shipments I had protected for 9 years. Nobody spoke. That was fine. Silence, at least, did not forge signatures. Outside, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated compliance alert. "Certification holder removal request submitted. Regulatory review triggered." I stared at the message. Calvin had tried to erase my name. Instead, he had invited the state to look closer. If you think refusing to sign that fake compliance handoff was too much, comment "too far." But if you believe I did the right thing by protecting my name and the truth, comment "I stand with Maris." I need to know I'm not alone. By the time I reached my apartment, Northvale was already proving how replaceable we were. At 9:04 p.m., according to Evelyn, the first overnight shift without an overnight team began with 2-day supervisors sitting at home, logged into the monitoring portal on laptops. Neither of them held cold chain compliance certification. One usually managed driver schedules. The other ordered packing foam. Naturally, Calvin called that cross-functional coverage, because apparently words become operations if you say them confidently enough. I tried not to look at my phone. I failed. At 1:17 a.m., Storage Zone B14 threw a temperature deviation alert. The bay was supposed to remain at minus 70 degrees Celsius. It climbed to minus 61 in 9 minutes. That was not catastrophic yet, but it was exactly the kind of early warning that required a physical inspection. Door seal, compressor pressure, backup power load, airflow obstruction, access log. The remote supervisors marked it sensor noise. I sat on my couch, still in my thermal socks, staring at that message from Evelyn until my jaw hurt. Sensor noise. 2 words that could turn medicine into trash and trash into a legal memo. By morning, the damage was contained, but not clean. A shipment of diagnostic reagents valued at $4.6 million was placed on quarantine hold because the overnight temperature record had a gap, and the gap had no certified sign-off. Mercyline Health Network noticed before lunch. Of course they did. Hospitals have a strange habit of caring whether medical supplies are safe. They requested the overnight compliance packet for B14, including the responsible officer's certification status. Calvin, I later learned, told operations to send the standard file, meaning my file. At 12:38 p.m., Mercyline's automated portal rejected the submission. The reason was only one line, but it hit like a gavel. Certification holder inactive as of termination timestamp. So the system did sleep after all. It just woke up honest. Calvin's spreadsheet had finally met a database with memory. The rejection from Mercyline changed the air in my apartment. I stopped pacing. I made coffee. I did not drink. Opened my laptop and began building a timeline. If Northvale wanted to turn my name into a life raft, I would make sure the rope had timestamps. First came the emails. 6 warnings about overnight certification coverage, 4 maintenance concerns, 2 notes about reduced training hours, and Calvin's famous reply, "Noted. We are moving forward." Moving forward, apparently, meant driving a refrigerated truck off a cliff. Then I saved my termination notice, the access removal alert, the compliance packet with that poisonous sentence, and screenshots Evelyn sent from the dashboard. My name was still sitting there under overnight compliance lead, glowing like a lie with formatting. I called Marcus first. He sounded exhausted. They offered me $500 to confirm I completed transition training. What training? He laughed. Exactly. Evelyn had been asked to avoid the word terminated and use restructuring instead. Brian said HR wanted him to sign a statement that the day supervisors had shadowed us for 2 weeks. They had not shadowed us for 2 minutes, unless walking past our freezer bay counted as development. By noon, my anger had become organized. I wrote one email and copied legal, HR, Calvin, and the compliance inbox. I do not authorize Northvale Biotransit to use my name, certification number, electronic signature, or prior access credentials for any overnight operation following my termination at 6:12 a.m. I read it twice, removed every emotional word, and sent it. Calvin called 9 minutes later. "Maris," he said, using the calm voice people use when they have lost control. "We can solve this like adults. Sign the acknowledgement, and I'll approve 2 weeks of severance." "You're offering to buy my certification with half a paycheck?" His breathing changed. "Don't make yourself a martyr. You were night shift." "Then stop needing me." After I hung up, a new email arrived. The sender line made my hands still. State Board of Medical Logistics Licensing. Subject, request for testimony regarding Northvale Biotransit. Overnight compliance coverage. By the next morning, Calvin had discovered the oldest executive survival skill in America: blame the woman who kept receipts. I learned about his new story from Marcus, who still had friends inside operations. According to Calvin, I was disgruntled, uncooperative, and attempting to obstruct a smooth transition. That was impressive, considering he had terminated me, locked my badge, and walked me out with security before breakfast. But why let chronology ruin a good lie? Then he hired an outside compliance consultant named Dennis Pike. Dennis had glossy credentials, a clean LinkedIn photo, and absolutely no authority to certify past overnight operations he had not supervised. Naturally, Calvin introduced him as our independent compliance solution. Independent, yes. A solution, no. To make the paperwork prettier, Calvin scheduled emergency training for the day staff. It lasted 47 minutes. Someone sent me a screenshot of the invite. Cold chain readiness acceleration session. In real life, that meant 3 supervisors watching slides about freezer alarms while eating vending machine muffins. By 10:03 a.m., Calvin labeled them transition ready. Mercyline was less inspired. Their contract team requested the previous 14 days of overnight compliance records, including officer coverage, temperature deviations, corrective actions, access logs, and certification validation. That was not a request. That was a flashlight. Calvin panicked in the polished way executives panic. He did not stop operations. He did not call the board. He ordered wording changed. Certified Overnight Officer became Automated Overnight Monitoring Protocol. Manual Inspection Completed became Remote Alert Review Performed. My name disappeared from one screen and reappeared in archived reports like a ghost they could not evict. Late that afternoon, Evelyn called me from her car. Her voice shook. "Maris, they edited the compliance descriptions after Mercyline's request came in." I closed my eyes. "Who approved it?" She exhaled once. "Calvin. His user ID is on every change. For a second, the pressure in my chest loosened. Because every regulated system has an audit trail. It records who changed what, when they changed it, and whether they changed it before or after someone started asking questions. Very inconvenient questions. The hearing room looked nothing like justice on television. No dramatic music, no wooden gavel, just fluorescent lights, bottled water, and 3 licensing board members who had read enough Northvale documents to lose faith in humanity. I sat at one table. Calvin sat across from me with company counsel, wearing the wounded expression of a man shocked that consequences had scheduled an appointment. His attorney opened by calling me a former employee with obvious resentment. Cute. I had been disgruntled, apparently, because I refused to let them use my certification like a spare key after throwing me out of the building. The board chair turned to me. Miss Dean, after your termination, did you authorize Northvale to list you as responsible for overnight cold chain compliance? I kept my hands folded. My name is not permitted to appear on operational records after the moment I was terminated. Calvin shifted. The second board member asked, was there another qualified person assigned to replace you during those overnight shifts? No, I said. No one on the day team held valid replacement certification for overnight compliance coverage. Calvin's lawyer jumped in. The company maintained automated monitoring at all times. I looked at the board, not at him. Automation records temperature. It does not inspect a freezer seal, verify corrective action, or accept legal accountability. The license requires a certified officer, not a dashboard with a password. That landed. The chair asked one final question. If Northvale continued operating under your certification after termination, how would you characterize that? I inhaled once. The anger was still there, but now it had a suit, a folder, and excellent posture. If the company operated under my name after firing me, that was a false representation to the licensing authority. Calvin spoke. She is trying to punish the company. I turned to him. No, Calvin, I am reading your decision back to you in legal English. Then the board requested the audit trail. Minutes later, the screen showed wording changes Calvin had approved after Mercylene's records request. The board did not announce disaster loudly. That was the strangest part. No one shouted. No one slammed a folder. The chair adjusted her glasses and said Northvale Biotransit's medical cold storage license would be temporarily suspended pending investigation. Calvin blinked like his brain needed buffering. Within 40 minutes, the consequences started moving faster than any refrigerated truck he had ever ignored. 42 shipments were frozen in processing status. 11 hospitals were instructed to activate emergency carrier backups. The diagnostic reagent lot from B14, valued at $4.6 million, remained under quarantine because nobody could prove the overnight deviation had been handled by a certified officer. Then Mercyline Health Network sent its notice. Their $210 million distribution contract was placed on immediate hold due to Northvale's loss of verified compliance capacity. That phrase sounded almost gentle, like a pillow placed over a siren. In reality, it meant Calvin's little $15,000 savings plan had just set fire to the company's crown jewel. A Mercyline director joined the call later that afternoon. Calvin tried his polished voice first. "This is a temporary staffing misunderstanding," he said. The director answered, "No, this is a trust problem." I almost admired the efficiency. 5 words, no wasted oxygen. By evening, Calvin called me from a blocked number. I let it ring once, then answered. "Maris," he said, softer now. "We can bring you back. Senior title. 35% raise. Retention bonus." Funny how fast redundant labor becomes strategic leadership when contracts start bleeding. I asked, "Do you need me back, or do you need my certification back?" Silence. There it was. The truth, standing in the room without a badge. "I want to fix this," he said. "No, Calvin. You want me to make your false paperwork look accidental." The next morning, I received another notice from the board. Northvale was not the only subject of review anymore. They had opened an individual investigation into Calvin Rusk for directing the use of a terminated employee's certification. Calvin's suspension arrived by email, which felt appropriate. A man who had reduced 17 people to a spreadsheet was now reduced to one sentence from the board. Pending completion of the investigation, Calvin Rusk is relieved of operational authority. Northvale tried to make it sound temporary. Internally, everyone knew the locks had changed before the sentence ended. His calendar vanished. His direct reports became interim reporting lines. Corporate America has such elegant ways to say abandoned. Then the documents started leaking through discovery. Calvin had cut compliance training by 62% in 7 months. He had postponed sensor calibration twice. He had reclassified live emergency drills as optional development activities. Worst of all, he had pressured employees to sign completion records for training sessions that never happened. Apparently, in Calvin's universe, watching a 10-slide deck while eating lunch counted as readiness. 2 days later, he found me outside the licensing office. He looked smaller without a conference table protecting him. "Maris," he said, "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." I studied him for a moment. That was always the line, wasn't it? Nobody ever means harm. They just remove safeguards, ignore warnings, silence experts, fake paperwork, and hope the bill lands on someone else's desk. "You gambled with patient safety," I said. "You used medicine like casino chips and called it efficiency." His face tightened. For once, he had no corporate phrase ready. That afternoon, Mercyline called. They were moving their emergency distribution to a certified alternate carrier, and they wanted my entire former overnight team on the transition project. All 17 of us. Marcus texted first. "Please tell me this is real." I smiled for the first time in days. "It's real," I wrote back. "The redundant labor just got recruited. By the people who finally counted." Justice did not arrive with thunder. It arrived in a letter from the licensing board. Northvale Biotransit lost its authority to operate high-risk medical cold storage for at least 18 months. Before applying again, the company had to pay fines, submit to independent audits, rebuild its training program, and recertify every procedure Calvin had treated like decorative paperwork. Calvin was fired 2 days later. The official language said, "for cause." The unofficial translation was shorter. He had become too expensive to defend. He was barred from holding operational authority on licensed medical logistics contracts while the investigation remained active. For a man who once laughed at compliance, that was almost poetic. As for us, Mercyline's alternate carrier made the offer formal. All 17 members of the night shift were hired back together, with better pay, clearer authority, and written protection against false certification pressure. I was named Director of Overnight Medical Logistics Compliance. On my first training day, I stood before a room of new hires and former coworkers. No speech needed drama. The truth had already done enough. I wrote one sentence on the screen. "Compliance is not paperwork. It is a promise." Nobody laughed. They understood. Afterward, Marcus, Evelyn, and the others handed me a small box. Inside was my new nameplate. On the front, Maris Dean, Director of Overnight Medical Logistics Compliance. On the back, they had engraved one sentence. "Apparently, the night shift creates revenue." I laughed then. Not because Calvin lost, because we finally counted. What stayed with me was not Calvin's collapse, but the reminder that our value does not disappear just because someone powerful refuses to see it. I took 5 lessons from this story. First, never let anyone call your responsibility meaningless when others depend on it. Second, document the truth, because records protect what memory cannot. Third, professionalism means doing what is right, not what is easy. Fourth, ethical shortcuts always become expensive. Fifth, self-respect is not revenge. It is the line you refuse to cross. What about you? Did this story teach you something personal? Share it in the comments, because your words may encourage someone who needs strength today. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who deserves to remember their worth. Sometimes passing on the right story is how we help another person stand taller.
Welcome to Boardroom Revenge Stories, a channel focused on workplace conflict, corporate betrayal, power struggles, and quiet justice. Our stories follow a structured workflow to deliver a consistent, immersive experience. We start by analyzing real discussions on Reddit, Facebook, Quora, and blogs. Next, we craft original scripts using AI tools like ChatGPT. We then use 11 Labs to transform text into high-quality voice and edit everything in CapCut for a smooth, cinematic finish. Thumbnails are designed with Canva, and every video is carefully reviewed before release. These stories go beyond entertainment, revealing how power truly works and how justice quietly unfolds.